Knox Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Knox Slab Audio in our fourth Master Series. I do believe this is the fifth video in our fourth Master Series dealing with the stereo field domain, and this is a continuation from the last video, so let's just get started and resume from where we left off talking about the stereo field domain. Okay, so the next concept we really need to get in our heads is that whenever we're thinking of one, we have to think of the other. That meaning that whenever we're thinking about sonic balance and sonic clarity, whenever we're addressing one, we have to immediately address the other so that we can take them both into consideration as we do anything. It is a huge thing to get in our head. That way, anytime we're talking about sonic balance, that we immediately think about sonic clarity right afterwards. How is one going to affect the other? So anytime we think of one, we immediately think of the other to see how it's going to be affecting the other. So you really have to get that in your head, that concept, so it becomes second nature to you. To anytime you think about the sonic balance that's happening in the mix, that you immediately take into consideration afterwards the sonic clarity. Or whenever you're thinking about sonic clarity, how's that going to affect the sonic balance? And once you get that in your head, you have to immediately... The next thing is sometimes you have to sacrifice one for the other. There is just no doubt. You are going to come to times to where you can, you're trying to get really good sonic clarity, but you're going to sacrifice a little bit of sonic balance in the process to try to get that clarity. And it's okay as long as it's premeditated. Or you're trying to get a really good sonic balance. You're like, I'm really getting a good sonic balance there, but I'm losing a little bit of clarity. Sometimes you will do that in certain productions, in certain types of music, with certain types of compositions and arrangements, that you are going to be in that position to where you're going to have to take that into consideration and sometimes sacrifice one for the other a little bit to get something put together. I mean, you just have no choice. There's no way to get them both, as much as you'd like to in this certain arrangement and composition and what you have to work with. So you really have to keep that in mind. That's the next thing you want to think about. The next obvious concept we want to talk about is oddball sonic balances. So anytime we're talking about oddball sonic balances, we have either just really highs and really lows, or we got mids and lows, or we got mids and highs, that we have to make a decision on those. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, as long as the more we think about it and the more we practice it. That an example is I've got really super lows, a low bass and a low kick drum, and some really super high brass stuff. Now there's multiple ways that I could arrange that, trying to get sonic clarity and sonic balance. And one example is I've kicked the bass off a little bit to the right, the kick a little bit to the left, and then I've duplicated that brass track off to way right and way left. And I did a little bit of fidgeting on it. On one side, I delayed it just a little bit and added a little bit of detuning, so it wasn't exactly the same on either side. And it came out sounding great. It's and it sounded really balanced to me. I mean, it just came out sounding just sharp, and I got to maintain clarity there also for the most part. The bass and the kick drum were going to overlap a little bit, but they were still fairly clear, and so I got as much clarity and as much balance as possible with that arrangement. And there's anytime you have that, you have to take that in consideration. It's like sometimes you might do it totally different. You might really be trying to get a sonic balance and duplicating tracks to get a really balanced sound in the spectrum, or you might get a little bit of odd balance and get clarity. I got the kick over there, or the kicks hitting with some kind of sax over there. And it's like it's off and it's not really sounding all that balanced because they're on totally different sides of the spectrum and different sides of the stereo field. But I've got really nice clarity, and I've decided that sounds really good for this production. And you really have to think about that because different productions can be very different, and whatever you might happen to be working on, different ways of approaching it and seeing what would be best for it, you have to consider it. And the more it's premeditated and the more you think about it, the better chance that it's going to come out sounding good. There's no right and wrong way exactly to do it. I mean, if you're doing stuff that's on the radio a lot, you're trying to emulate some type of band or some genre that's normally done this way, you kind of have to take that in consideration. But that doesn't mean they're doing it the right way, and you might want to do it a little bit different to sound a little bit different. So really keep those concepts in your head. If you keep those concepts in your head and it's much more premeditated and it's much more thought out, that there's a much better chance of you attaining better sonic balance and sonic clarity. And sometimes you might be sacrificing one for the other a little bit, or trying to do something a little bit different that's a little bit unbalanced or unclear a little bit here or there to attain some type of effect, or you just don't have any choice. So because of the arrangement and the complement of instruments that you're dealing with. So really keep that in mind, and there's a much better chance that it will come out with a much better sonic balance and a much better clarity. If it's just premeditated, that you just have that to work with. And sometimes you got to sacrifice one for the other. And sometimes you just have to make an artistic decision what's going to sound best for this type of a production. So that's the next thing we really need to think about. Next concept coming up. Okay, the next concept we want to talk about is pretty simple. That is frequency separation in the frequency realm while we're talking about the stereo field. That way it will definitely help us maintain sonic clarity and sonic balance in a couple different ways. The first thing is anytime I have, like, let's say I'm going to move, I've got a pretty full complement of instruments, and over on the left hand side I'm trying to work it to where I've got a couple instruments I have to put over there. So I've got my bass that's a very low end spectrum, and then I got my main guitar that's fairly upper end spectrum. So I've got them over there separated as much as I can. They're in different frequency domains, different areas in the frequency domain, so I can get them pretty close to each other without them really super conflicting that much, and I can still get a lot of clarity if I can get them separated enough. And yeah, right there, oh, that sounds good. It's a simple concept to try to, if I'm going to have to move more than one instrument over to one side or the other, to make sure I'm thinking about that as best I can to get them in different areas of the spectrum. Does that make sense? Of different octave ranges, different areas of the spectrum, higher, lower, mids and lows, or mids and highs. As far as much separation as I can get, if they have to be over fairly close to each other on one side or the other, or in the center somewhere. Does that make sense? Unless I'm trying to do sculpting, which means, like, let's say I have that guitar and this synth, and they're playing in the fairly same octave range. One of them's ba-na-na-na, and the other one's do-do-do-do-do-do. And, and they're doing this, this thing that's counterpoint. But I want them in the same kind of octave range because they kind of blend. They're doing harmonies to each other as one's rising and one's falling, but it kind of blends, and it sounds really cool. And it's just like, whoa, yeah, that is wild. Or you're trying to blend sounds to where I have them in this fairly same octave range, and they're both, playing chords structures, or they're both playing some kind of melody line over there. That can be, then there's more of a blending and a sound sculpting effect happening there. But better if they're better to have them, the frequency ranges, the more farther separated they are, the better. Anytime you have them over to one side, the other, or in close to center. And the next concept is the separation, thinking about frequency domain, and the range. Then you're thinking about balance. So anytime you got balance, you need to think about that also. So that, if you've got this guitar and this bass over here, what is going on the other side? You got this synth over there working with a sax or something. You really need to think about the balance, like we talked about, taking it into consideration. So as you get it set out there like that, and you go, well, how's that affecting the balance? Nah, I know it seems like that, but I really need to bring this synth over here. It's a little bit close to that guitar, but this bass in over here with this sax, it sounds better. It sounds better balanced. How much clarity am I missing? And I'm listening to the spectrum of each of them, how the spectrum is affecting the other ones on either side, or if I had the bass fairly center with this synth or something like that, how is it affecting the other one and my balance, So I've got a nice balance there in the spectrum. In the stereo field. Sometimes we have to sacrifice one for the other. We know that. But it's a really good thing to think about. When things start getting anywhere near each other, trying to think about that as far as the spectrum. So what is your objective? Make it way more premeditated, and there's a much better chance that whatever you're doing is going to come out sounding that much better. Off to the next concept. Okay, so the last couple things we want to talk about are pretty simple concepts. The first one is a good full spectrum for your stereo field. So whenever you have a really full mix that's got everything from the low to the high end, just keep in mind there's a really good chance you might end up having to sacrifice a little bit of clarity. Unless things are not hitting at the same time, you might be able to move things around a little bit, but you might have to sacrifice a little bit. You get a nice full spectrum, a nice good spectral balance, that's all the way low end, all the way to high end, happening a lot. That the balance, if you have a lot of instruments going on, you just got to do the best you can with the clarity, monoing the tracks and trying to get things away from each other. But don't be surprised that anytime you're dealing with really good full spectrum, that it's a little bit of a problem. I mean, it just is, and you just got to kind of do the best you can with it and don't get frustrated. So the next thing we want to talk about is basically the meat and potatoes of what's going to really help you as far as a producer and engineer. And the concept is a moving stereo field. So our best friend when we're dealing with a moving stereo field is our automation. So we're all familiar with using automation for volume because, the performances weren't just right. We got to automate stuff all over the place, So we're used to using our automation. And this is like a really refined point of view in mixing, trying to attain really good sonic balance and sonic clarity, is a moving stereo field. We use it sometimes. A prime example is for one, I've got a transition that I've rearranged the stereo field so that everything sounds as good sonic balance with good sonic balance and sonic clarity. And then I hit this break, so I rearrange the entire stereo field so that I got as good a sonic balance and sonic clarity for that break. And then I go into this next movement. I have to rearrange the entire stereo field, move everything around so it's got as much, sonic balance and sonic clarity as possible. That's a very simple example. And the more we dig into it, every single moment in time is important. So at each individual moment, I might rearrange things in the stereo field. At this one moment, I have this arrangement here, but at this next moment, I've got this bass does this thing with the sax over here, but the keys are hitting at the same time, so I got to move the keys out of the way a little bit, and then that kick drum's hitting at the same time as that bass, and I want to move that bass over a little bit. It's a moving stereo field, because the concept of a moving stereo field, it helps you to maintain as much sonic balance and as much sonic clarity at each individual moment in time as possible. So the smaller of the moments you break it down to, the better chance you're going to get really good sonic balance and sonic clarity throughout the production. So you really have to practice that because there's no right way to do it. And we talked about, you know, sometimes you might have to sacrifice one for the other, and you always have to, anytime you think about one, you have to think about the other. But the more you take the concept of a moving stereo field into consideration to use it as a workflow and get a good workflow going with it with your automation, your mixers are going to come out sounding 100, 200, 300% better because you, at every moment, you've got one measure and you've arranged things in this movement, and it doesn't sound too bad at the beginning of it. In the second measure, all of a sudden this drum does this thing with this bass over there, and then the keys are the guitar, that, and it just all of a sudden, you know, and it's like you got that moving stereo field option. You can move things all over the place for just a moment and then move them right back. That way, at that moment, back, and then move it again and move it again. You can move it all. This moving stereo field concept helps you to visualize every moment in time as its own separate mix as far as the stereo field is concerned to get as much sonic balance and as much sonic clarity as possible. And like I said, it just takes practice. You're going to have to sit down with your productions and start practicing utilizing that concept because the whole entire arrangement can change from one moment to the next to get as much balance and clarity as possible. But if you don't utilize it, there's no point to much of what we're talking about in this master series because you just have to. You got to move things around. That moving stereo field concept is going to become a huge friend for you, and your thing, the sound of your productions will improve immensely because you start taking into consideration. All of a sudden, you look at your automation with your stereo field, just like when you're automating volume for all your tracks, you know, trying to make things sound at that one moment. I've got that brass hit and I gotta drop that down, then I gotta push that other one up, and then I gotta drop that down on all these tracks, trying to make everything sound as good as it can every moment. You look at the same way with your stereo field, trying to get that sonic balance and sonic clarity with your stereo field, and it's amazing what you can do with it because at any individual moment you got that thing in it. Even a simple example I talked about before, I got this bass, you know, but the arrangement isn't going to give it the clarity. So all of a sudden I've kicked it off to the right, and I've got this tom that hits just off. I had to move it off to the left because just and they're all deep, thick, lush, and the bass just sounds so good, and just like. And it's just like, oh, God, that sounds good, bro. I mean, I can just hear the clarity. But then I move it right back over where it was because of what's happening in the production. So, you know, for what's happening at the next moment. So the moving stereo field concept and beginning to work with it and utilize it is going to help you. You know, it's a huge concept to get in your head and start practicing and utilizing because it's one of the biggest things that's going to help you maintain really good sonic balance and sonic clarity every moment in time. So I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video dealing with sonic balance and sonic clarity in the stereo field domain. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the frequency and spectrum domain. So peace, soap, love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video, and I will see you in the next one.